Welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 170. We're going to talk about Audie and the Wolf from 2008. I watched this on Tubi. I had not seen this before. As always, we start with the prominent crew and cast. You can find links to a much more complete credit list in the show notes. The film was directed by B. Scott O'Malley, credited as Brian S. O'Malley. It was written by Frank Cowell III, who did the short story, and B. Scott O'Malley, credited as Brian S. O'Malley. B. Scott O'Malley wrote and directed 3 feature films and penned dozens of feature screenplays, including the post-apocalyptic science fiction comedy Bleak Future. Frank Cowell wrote the short story that this film is based on. He did slightly more work as an actor before moving on to reality TV editing for a few shows. This shockingly good cast includes Derek Hughes as John Doe, Krista Campbell as Rachel Brock, Rance Howard as Dr. Maliosis, and Tabori as the Wolf. Derek Hughes got his start acting on television with shows like Angel, Grown Ups, and CSI New York. His highest profile film is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. He's also a professional magician with a unique niche combining theatrical performance with sleight of hand artistry, performing his magic on MTV, VH1, Comedy Central, Penn & Teller Fool Us, and The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Hughes made contributions behind the scenes as well, creating original deception for MTV's Room 401, Justin Willman's YouTube series Magic Meltdown, and Michael Carbonaro's appearances as the magic clerk on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Hughes travels the country performing his magic. Krista Campbell started in softcore erotica and horror films, appearing in films like 2001 Maniacs, The Wicker Man, and Day of the Dead. She moved on to supporting roles in films like Mozart and the Whale, The Iceman, and Homefront. Campbell achieved much more success establishing her own production company, Campbell Grobman Films, which has produced films including Texas Chainsaw, The Hitman's Bodyguard, Hellboy, Rambo: Last Blood, The Expendables 4, and Red Sonja. In an interesting little coincidence, she produced a documentary about the production company that made the film I'm going to cover next, The Go-Go Boys, the inside story of Cannon Films. Rance Howard is the father of actor and filmmaker Ron Howard and actor Clint Howard, and grandfather of actresses Bryce Dallas Howard and Paige Howard. His first television appearance was in a 1956 episode of Kraft Theater, and he made his film debut the same year in Frontier Woman. He has 285 roles in his credit list, so I'm only going to have time to mention highlights like Cool Hand Luke, Gunsmoke, Chinatown, the original Battlestar Galactica, Quantum Leap, Universal Soldier, Ed Wood, Apollo 13, Seinfeld, Independence Day, Babylon 5, Cinderella Man, Walk Hard, The Dewey Cox Story, and Nebraska. One of his last roles was on Arrested Development. As always, I wish I could tell you more about the dog performer, Tabori. Now, I do recommend this film for fans of comedy horror hybrids. If you enjoyed Shaun of the Dead and American Werewolf in London or Evil Dead 2, which are all films this movie has explicitly modeled itself after, you might find something to enjoy here. While it doesn't reach the heights of those genre classics, the film shows genuine affection for horror comedy and brings a fresh perspective to werewolf lore. Viewers should approach this as an independent production working within budget constraints rather than expecting studio-level polish. What it lacks in resources, it compensates for with passion and inventive storytelling. The marketing tagline, "You've never seen a werewolf movie like this," is quite accurate. The reverse transformation concept is genuinely original. I haven't seen this before. Audie and the Wolf flips the traditional werewolf narrative on its head. Most werewolf films deal with humans transforming into beasts, but this film presents us with a wolf that transforms into a savage human during the full moon. It's a clever inversion that allows the filmmakers to explore themes of domestication versus wildness from a fresh angle. The film was clearly made on a shoestring budget, but it creates a contained thriller set primarily in a Hollywood mansion. This setting choice allows for both practical production considerations and thematic resonance. Hollywood is a place where people transform themselves, often losing their humanity in the process. So let's tackle the synopsis. An Indian, Del Bearstride, is constructing a bomb when 4 bounty hunters locate him. He sends his pet wolf, Weya, off to hide, giving it cryptic instructions to stay hidden and not go near humans before going out in a blaze of glory. A drunk Hollywood starlet almost hits Weya with her car. Instead, she takes him home as a rescue animal. Under the full moon, he transforms into a man and kills Rachel, who pumps him full of lead with no effect. The next morning, he's still in human form, but he understands almost nothing about the human world. He doesn't know where he came from, and he can't control his insatiable hunger for raw meat. For the rest of the film, everyone addresses him as John Doe. Enter Audie Bantam, a grocery delivery girl with an attitude and a history of making poor life choices. She delivers a full bag of meat to John and falls head over heels for him. I don't know why. After she leaves, we learn that Rachel isn't totally dead. She's undead. She confronts John, who shoots her. Later, when John says he's not feeling well, Audie sends a sketchy doctor to examine John. John kills and partially eats the doctor. Then he does the same to a nice Guatemalan couple. He locks their son in with Rachel, who is clearly starting to show signs of decay. Audie brings John new clothes. She then immediately seduces him. Audie has serious issues. Audie and John watch some TV to try and trigger his memories, which works when he sees a wolf on a nature documentary. John again insists that there is something wrong with him, so Audie calls a demonic exorcist couple. Audie heads out to pay her rent, so she's not there to see John massacre the couple. One of them does manage to use a pentagram pendant to temporarily hold John at bay. When John disposes of the corpses in the basement, we learn that Doc and the Guatemalan couple are undead now as well. Audie takes John to see a catatonic Catholic priest. I'm not sure what she expects him to do, but he does become lucid enough to douse John with holy water. The priest diagnoses him as a werewolf, which Audie doesn't believe. John confesses all of the killings so far to her, and she fights to convince John that he's not a werewolf, which, I mean, technically she's correct since he's the inverse of a werewolf. John makes her leave to protect her and gives her the pendant as well. He dreams of the ghost of Bearstride. Bearstride explains the lore to John, something he has done every month for years. John has to chop up and burn his undead victims before they do the same to him. John tries and fails to prove that he's a man and that he has self-control. He kills Rachel's agent and the gardener. The basement is filling up with bodies. John lets the boy, the only one still actually alive, go. The bodies are really piling up as John kills a hooker, a movie director, and his wife. John's undead victims escape the basement. A full-fledged battle royale breaks out in which John dismembers them all with an axe and a knife. Audie shows up to find John burning a pile of bodies. He chases her through the mansion. She manages to call the cops and uses the pendant to hold him off. He finally remembers that he loves her. He puts the pendant around his neck to control himself, and they make love. Next morning, John is Weya the wolf again, still wearing the pendant. Audie takes completely in stride that her boyfriend is a wolf most of the month. The end. There were no transformation sequences in this film. Given the indie budget, it makes a lot of sense. We see the wolf Weya under the full moon. The camera pans away and cuts to Rachel's bedroom, where a now fully human John Doe enters. One full movie later, John falls asleep with Audie in Rachel's bed. When morning comes, John is once again the wolf. On top of that, John looks completely human. There is no werewolf look. And I'm sure that production saved a lot of budget here. Money that was used on the violent kills and the undead makeup. So, well, I think they made the correct choice to make the best film they could. There's not really anything for us to discuss here. The werewolf lore in Audie and the Wolf subverts classical werewolf mythology by flipping the fundamental nature of the transformation. Rather than depicting the beast as humanity's primal impulses unleashed, it suggests the more disturbing possibility that humanity itself is the true monster, with the wolf's natural killing instincts for food or territory being far less horrifying than human calculation, cruelty, and sadistic pleasure and violence. The traditional full moon trigger ensures that crucial element of loss of control, and while silver is not mentioned at all, fire, dismemberment, and an occult pendant all work to hurt or deter John. The narrative further enriches its supernatural framework by escalating the curse of undead victims, a concept that was introduced in American Werewolf in London. John must kill his victims a second time. But beware, those victims have a second chance to stop the werewolf. This is an awesome addition. First, it doubles the number of kills in the movie. Everyone gets to die twice. Also, it means the more violent and out of control John gets, the more danger he puts himself in when he finds himself completely outnumbered. Finally, it grounds the lycanthropy in a shamanistic tradition, presenting it as a curse upon sinners who must learn their lessons, thus creating a callback to ancient werewolf myths that present the condition as an exploration of moral consequence and the nature of evil. All right, Audie and the Wolf provocatively inverts traditional werewolf mythology, challenging our assumptions about civilization and the nature of monstrosity itself. Rather than depicting lycanthropy as humanity's descent into bestial savagery, the film suggests that domestication represents a fundamental corruption of the natural order. Through John/Weya and the Hollywood mansion that serves as his prison, the film constructs an allegory about how civilization transforms innocent wilderness into calculated malice. The film's subversion lies in John's dual existence. As Way of the Wolf, he presumably lives according to natural law, killing only when necessary, following instinctual patterns governing his species for millennia. However, his monthly transformation into a human form unleashes something far more disturbing: a calculated cruelty, sadistic pleasure in killing, and the creation of undead victims who mirror his cursed existence. This inversion suggests that what we consider evolution towards civilization is actually de-evolution into something more monstrous than any beast. The Hollywood setting fits the theme perfectly. A location notorious for transforming innocent people into artificial constructs serves as the ideal backdrop for exploring how domestication corrupts natural innocence. Just as the entertainment industry repackages authentic human experience as manufactured spectacle, John's transformation strips away his wolf identity and forces him into a human form that can only express itself through violence. Bear Stride adds another layer to the domestication theme. The backstory reveals John was once a violent Indian fighter, already a product of colonial domestication, who was captured by a shaman and sentenced to spend most of his life as a wolf. This shamanic intervention attempts to restore natural balance by forcing John to experience existence from the perspective of the wild creatures he once hunted. The irony is that this rehabilitation only intensifies his capacity for violence when he returns to human form, suggesting that once natural innocence is corrupted, it cannot be restored. Bear Stride himself complicates the film's apparent valorization of wild nature over civilization. His identity as a bomb-making terrorist suggests that indigenous resistance to colonization has itself been corrupted. Those fighting domestication adopt the tools of their oppressors. The relationship between Audie and John represents the film's most complex exploration of domestication. Audie appears to represent domesticating feminine influence, literally bringing John into domestic space and integrating him into human society through food, clothing, and social interaction. However, Audie herself is hardly a poster child for productive civilization. Her history of poor choices, willingness to overlook obvious signs of John's violent nature, and ultimate acceptance of their relationship despite the full knowledge of what he is, suggests she may represent not domestication but rather a different form of wilderness, one civilization has damaged but not destroyed. Her attraction to John stems from recognition of a kindred spirit, another being whom society has failed to properly domesticate. The film's undead victims serve as a powerful metaphor for how domestication creates lingering damage that cannot be easily resolved. Unlike traditional werewolf victims who die permanently, John's victims return as decaying reminders of his violence, forcing him into an ongoing cycle of destruction. These undead represent how civilization's attempts to control natural forces create persistent problems that demand increasingly violent solutions. The climactic battle between John and his undead victims literally represents civilization at war with itself. Audie and the Wolf ultimately presents domestication not as humanity's triumph over nature, but as a tragic corruption that transforms both the domesticated and the domesticator. The film suggests that once the natural order is disrupted, whether through colonial violence, urban development, or the human impulse to control wilderness, the resulting damage creates cycles of violence that may be impossible to break. John's monthly transformation serves as a metaphor for how suppressing natural forces often results in their expression in even more destructive forms. The film's somewhat ambiguous ending, with Audie accepting John's dual nature rather than trying to change it, offers tentative hope that coexistence with wilderness might be possible, but only if civilization can learn to accept rather than control the forces it encounters. Now, whether this represents genuine wisdom or is another form of corruption remains unclear, leaving viewers to grapple with the film's challenging questions about the true cost of domestication and the possibility of redemption in a world where natural innocence has been irrevocably lost. Now let's move on and talk about identity and self-knowledge. Through the character of John Doe, a man who wakes once a month with no memory of his identity as the wolf Weya, the film examines the precarious balance between self-knowledge and self-control. Ignorance might seem like liberation from painful truths, but the absence of self-understanding ultimately is a curse endangering the individual and everyone around them. John's awakening into human form is the ultimate tabula rasa, a consciousness stripped of personal history, cultural context, and even basic understanding of his own nature. Free from the weight of his past, John exists in a state of pure present tense experience. His childlike wonder at television, his inability to understand social conventions, and his need for Audie to provide him with the most basic of necessities suggests someone experiencing the world with fresh eyes. However, The film quickly reveals this apparent freedom as an illusion. Without knowledge of his own nature, John cannot predict his hunger for raw meat, his capacity for violence, or the pattern of his transformations. Ignorance does not liberate him from his darker impulses. It makes him their slave. Each killing event becomes a horrific surprise to his conscious mind, even as his body acts with predatory efficiency. Audie's relationship with John represents society's attempt to construct identity from the outside when internal self-knowledge is absent. She provides him with clothes, a name, social experiences, and most importantly, an acceptable interpretation of his nature. Her insistence that he is not a werewolf is both literally correct, the best kind. He is indeed something more complex than traditional lycanthrope mythology suggests, but it's also dangerously naive. Rather than help John understand his nature, she imposes a palatable fiction upon him. Her efforts to normalize his behavior through television, social interaction, and romantic connection represent well-intentioned but ultimately futile attempts to create an identity. The film suggests that externally imposed identity, no matter how loving or well-intentioned, cannot substitute for genuine self-knowledge. Bill Bearstride's ghostly appearances provide the most direct commentary on the relationship between knowledge and control. Each month, Bearstride reminds John of his nature, the history of his curse, and the practical steps he must take to manage his condition. These scenes reveal John has lived this cycle of amnesia and violence repeatedly, with Bearstride as a persistent but largely ineffective source of crucial self-knowledge. This dynamic suggests that some forms of self-knowledge cannot be transmitted through external instruction. They must be internalized through lived experiences and conscious acceptance. The film's unique element of victims returning as undead serves as a powerful metaphor for how denied aspects of identity refuse to stay buried. Each person that John kills returns in increasingly decayed form, forcing him to repeatedly confront the consequences of his actions. These undead victims represent the parts of self-knowledge that individuals attempt to repress or forget. They become more disturbing and dangerous the longer they are denied acknowledgement. The climactic battle between John and his undead victims can be read as an internal war between conscious identity and repressed truth. John's use of axe and knife to dismember those unquiet dead suggests that confronting denied aspects of the self requires violence, decisive action, rather than gentle negotiation. The film's conclusion offers a tentative resolution to John's identity crisis, but at a cost. His reversion back into wolf form, while retaining the pendant, suggests that he has achieved, finally, some level of integration between his dual natures. However, the resolution requires Audie's acceptance of a relationship that will always be marked by danger and uncertainty. The ending implies that true self-knowledge often comes with painful recognitions that cannot be undone. John and Audie's relationship can continue only because they both acknowledge the reality of his nature rather than attempting to deny or transform it. This acceptance represents a mature approach to identity that embraces complex solutions rather than seeking simple solutions. But it's not the only way to read their relationship. And I'm going to talk about another one now. This film presents a disturbing case study of romantic love manifesting as a willful blindness, where obvious dangers are converted into acceptable risks. Through Audie Bantam's relationship with John Doe, the narrative explores how individuals ignore mounting evidence of their partner's destructive nature. And while love may demand acceptance of a partner's flaws, the film suggests that there does exist a threshold beyond which such acceptance becomes not devotion but delusion, a dangerous refusal to acknowledge reality that endangers both lover and beloved. Audie's romantic attraction to John precedes any knowledge of his character or history. Her instant infatuation, based entirely on physical attraction and projected qualities, reflects a common romantic pattern where individuals fall in love with an idealized version rather than engaging with actual reality. The film emphasizes this through Audie's consistent charitable interpretation of John's behavior. His massive consumption of raw meat becomes an endearing quirk rather than a warning sign. His confusion about basic social interactions registers as charming innocence rather than fundamental alienation from human society. This willful misinterpretation demonstrates how romantic love functions as a cognitive filter, screening out incompatible information. Audie simply doesn't miss warning signs. She actively transforms them into evidence that supports her romantic fantasy. Love becomes not just a lens through which she views John, but it's a commitment to a particular version of truth that cannot accommodate contradictory evidence. Audie's denial serves psychological functions beyond romantic attachment. Her history of poor life choices suggests a pattern where finding and fixing John might validate her own worth and competence. This dynamic transforms John into a project through which Audie can achieve personal redemption. If she can love someone this damaged back to wholeness, then perhaps she can prove her own value. The scene with the catatonic Catholic priest provides external validation of John's supernatural danger. The priest's immediate lucidity in John's presence, his use of holy water, and direct diagnosis of lycanthropy represent professional expertise cutting through romantic delusion. Yet, Audie's response reveals how deeply invested she has become in her own alternative interpretation. Rather than accepting this confirmation of mounting evidence, she treats it as yet another obstacle to overcome. Her continued insistence that John is not a werewolf demonstrates that denial has moved beyond simply misunderstanding into active resistance against reality itself. John's direct confessions of his killings represents the climactic confrontation between that love and reality. Faced with undeniable evidence from the source himself, Audie attempts to convince John that he's wrong about his own identity. She trusts her interpretation more than his firsthand experience. This reversal reveals how love can evolve from accepting another person into a form of colonization where the lover's desires override the beloved's experience. Audie's refusal to believe John's confession transforms protective devotion into denial of his agency and self-knowledge. Her love becomes a prison trapping both in an unsustainable fiction. The film's conclusion, where Audie accepts John's dual nature, finally, and chooses to maintain their relationship, invites radically different interpretations. From one perspective, her final acceptance represents a mature love that has finally embraced the complexity rather than demanding perfection. She has moved beyond denial to genuine acceptance, creating possibility for an authentic relationship. From another perspective, however, Audie's acceptance represents the ultimate triumph of delusion over self-preservation. By choosing to remain with someone that she knows to be periodically lethal, she demonstrates that her capacity for denial has simply evolved into a more sophisticated form. Her acceptance might be less about mature love than a complete abandonment of any reasonable self-protection. The film deliberately maintains this ambiguity, suggesting that the line between transformative acceptance and dangerous enabling might be impossible to definitively locate. What appears to be love's triumph over fear might equally represent love's final victory over sanity. The narrative offers no easy resolution, suggesting instead that the tension between love and reality is an unavoidable aspect of human romantic experience. One individual must navigate without clear guidelines or guaranteed outcomes, and where the price of choosing wrongly may be measured in lives rather than merely broken hearts. Finally, while watching this film, an unexpected connection emerged. The story of Pinocchio, a puppet desperately wanting to become a real boy, shares surprising parallels with a wolf seeking to regain his humanity. Though I really doubt the filmmakers intended this metaphor, the comparison illuminates both narratives' treatments of identity, morality, and the complex relationship between nature and civilization. Despite the disparate tones and genres, both stories center on protagonists existing in liminal states between human and non-human, struggling to understand their place in the moral universe while navigating the treacherous path toward authentic selfhood. However, where Pinocchio's journey represents an aspirational climb towards humanity and ethical behavior, John's transformation cycle suggests a more pessimistic view of human nature and the possibility of moral redemption. Both John and Pinocchio exist in states of incomplete humanity, though from dramatically different starting points. Pinocchio begins as an artificial creation, a wooden puppet animated by magic who desires to become a real boy. John exists as a wolf, periodically transformed into human form, experiencing humanity as a monthly curse. Yet both share fundamental displacement from their current forms. Pinocchio's wooden body constrains his participation in human society, while John's amnesia during human phases prevents him from controlling or understanding his actions. The crucial difference lies in their relationship to this transformation. Pinocchio actively seeks to become more human through learning ethical behavior and social conformity. John remains confused about his human form and lacks the continuity necessary to begin reclaiming his lost humanity. Both narratives center on protagonists who must navigate ethical choices, despite lacking the cultural programming and moral intuition that guide most humans from childhood. Pinocchio's journey is explicitly framed as moral education. He learns to distinguish right from wrong through experience, guided by Jiminy Cricket and motivated by his desire to become real. John faces similar challenges with crucial differences. His moral failures carry lethal consequences, and he lacks consistent access to guidance. While Pinocchio's mistakes typically result in embarrassment or temporary setbacks, John's ethical lapses result in death and undead victims. Del Bearstride provides some wisdom, but unlike Jiminy Cricket's fairy-appointed constant presence, his guidance cannot penetrate John's cyclical amnesia. Del appears more prison keeper than helpful guide. Both characters struggle with controlling appetites. Pinocchio with candy, alcohol, and Pleasure Island's temptations. John with a hunger for raw meat and his violent impulses. However, Pinocchio's temptations are recognizably human weaknesses that can be overcome through moral development, while John's hungers appear fundamental aspects of his nature that can only be managed, not eliminated. Both stories feature love as potentially redemptive, though from opposite directions. In Pinocchio, Geppetto's paternal love creates initial conditions for transformation, while Pinocchio's growing capacity to love others, particularly his willingness to sacrifice himself for Geppetto, ultimately enables his transformation into a real boy. Audie's love for John serves a more complex function. Rather than enabling transformation into something better, her love allows him to maintain relationships despite his dangerous nature. Where Geppetto loves helps Pinocchio become more human, Audie's love enables John to remain inhuman while participating in human society. Pinocchio's journey assumes moral development is possible through conscious choice and effort. His various failures and recoveries demonstrate that ethical behavior can be learned and that individuals have agency to change their fundamental character through sustained effort and proper guidance. John's situation presents a more troubling picture of moral agency. Monthly amnesia prevents him from learning from mistakes or building upon moral insights. Each transformation effectively resets his development, making sustained ethical growth nearly impossible. Both stories suggest ethical behavior requires not just good intentions, but cognitive continuity that allows for moral learning and habit formation. Stories offer contrasting perspectives on the relationship between inherent nature and environmental influence. Pinocchio begins as a literal blank slate who must develop moral character through experience and education, suggesting ethical behavior is learned rather than innate, and proper guidance can shape anyone into a moral being. John's situation implies a more deterministic view. His violent behavior during transformation appears inherent to his curse, rather than modifiable through education or will. While he can learn to manage his condition through the pendant, he cannot fundamentally alter his nature, suggesting that some aspects of identity may be immutable, requiring acceptance and management rather than transformation. Pinocchio's journey, while challenging, leads to clearly positive outcomes. His transformation into a real boy represents unambiguous improvement. He gains both humanity and the love he sought. John's final state is far more ambiguous. While the pendant allows some control over violent impulses, it's unclear whether this represents genuine progress or simply better management of an ongoing problem. His final state, a wolf wearing a protective charm, suggests detente with his condition rather than resolution. The comparison reveals two fundamentally different philosophies about human nature, moral development, and transformation possibilities. Pinocchio embodies optimistic views suggesting anyone can improve through effort, education, and love, assuming moral behavior is learnable and authentic humanity is achievable. John's story suggests some may be fundamentally incompatible with civilized society, where the best outcomes may be developing tools and relationships for managing dangerous impulses. Where Pinocchio transcends artificial origins to become fully human, John learns to coexist with his inhuman nature. Together, these narratives illustrate the range of approaches to transformation and moral development stories, from hopeful pedagogy of traditional fairy tales to a darker psychological realism of contemporary horror. They remind us that journeys toward authentic selfhood can lead to radically different destinations depending on your assumptions about humanity's fundamental nature. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Every once in a while, I go through my master list of werewolf movies to see if stuff has been added to streaming services, and this time a bunch had been. So I'll be backtracking a bit over the next month or so to catch up. Next, I plan on discussing Red Riding Hood from 1988. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bolt in the chamber, and we'll see you back next episode.